I'm Sinziana Iordache, and I'm a hyperrealist pencil artist. I would say a large drawing for me that's typically a 22 by 30 inches. That's an average of 150 hours plus, where I've had pieces with over 200 hours.
Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and welcome to the Art Podcast, where we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. This is Season 3, Episode 2. My guest this week is the Canadian-based Romanian hyperrealist artist Sinziana Iordache, who specialises in detailed graphic drawings of luxury watches. Sinziana produces photorealistic and hyperrealistic drawings with each meticulously placed stroke, every shade and tone carefully chosen. Her artworks reflect not just timepieces, but the epitome of horological elegance. Sinziana was born in Constanta, Romania in July 1986, the only child of Elena Chris, an accountant and web designer, and Ion Iordache, a consultant and trainer in security management. While she was still a toddler, her family moved west to Reșița near the Serbian border. Her father was serving as a captain in the military, and where she says she had a very happy childhood. Her mother's interest in precision art appealed to Sinziana from an early age, and she would easily amuse herself for hours. Her education began at the Triumvir High School and Polytechnic University Timisoara, studying architecture, before Sinziana moved to Canada in 2007, following her mother and stepfather, who had emigrated in 2003. Sinziana attended the Ryerson University in Toronto, where she studied interior design, which would become the catalyst for her starting her own business. Nowadays, she is a partner at Unfold Creative Studio and spends much of her time outside the business on drawing luxury watches, which can be time-consuming. Sinziana lives in Toronto with her partner, the artist Alex Sorey, and her cat. Sinziana, welcome to Season 3. You are one of the first guests on Season 3 of the Art Podcast, and thank you for being a listener too.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been enjoying listening to the podcast and discovering new artists.
Well, what is so fun about this show, Sinziana, as you know, is that we discover so many wonderful new artists and hopefully bring them to a wider audience. And when I saw your work, I think I found it initially on Instagram. I was completely blown away. I couldn't believe the incredible detail you have with your art. And it demands so much patience to do such incredible detail to your work. And I'm wondering which came first for you. Were you a patient person, or did this artwork teach you patience?
First of all, thank you so much for the kind words. I'm humbled. I think the art came first, to be honest, because I have always been a person that has always been interested in various subjects and, picking up different hobbies. And art was the one that really stuck the most with me. And I think along the way, it did teach me patience, and it taught me to kind of focus on the thing that I love most.
So when you were a child, were you that interested in that kind of detailed artwork?
I was always interested in artwork, and I started drawing quite early. I discovered my passion for details along the way. I've been interested in initially in the old Dutch masters. That kind of draw me to artwork, in particular portraits, and then Renaissance. And it was just along the way developing my skills, I realized that I love details, and the more details, the better.
Well, you certainly do, and it is such perfect work. I really am absolutely blown away by it, and I hope that people will go and follow you on social media. And of course, we'll have the links later on in the show for them to do that and discover the work for themselves. But I want to tell your story because if people are listening right now, they'll think, gosh, you've got really very good English. It's really very good English, but you were born on the Black Sea, weren't you? On the coast of the Black Sea in Romania, Constanta, Romania.
Yes, I was.
In 1986.
Correct.
You're the only child. Your parents, Elena Chris, was an accounting and web designer. Now, your father, Leon, was a consultant and trainer in security management, but you were telling me earlier that your mother was very interested in detailed art, but doesn't actually do that now. I'm wondering where she disconnected, because clearly you inherited that talent from her.
Yes, I think so. What I'll start saying is that I was born right as communist was ending in Romania. So my mother, in that sense, there were quite limited opportunities back then. She always wanted to go to architecture growing up, and that just never happened because of the way the times were. Romania wasn't a very progressive country at the time, and just life got in the way. I do remember as a child going through, old notebooks that I found of my parents, and I found this particular set of sketches, and I use the term sketches loosely because they were gorgeous ink drawings, and they were drawings of a series of objects, including cars. I believe there was an old camera, and I was just so mesmerized. And I sat down with my mother and I asked her, and that she was the one that was doing the drawings. I've never actually seen her draw since then. So I'm not sure what happened as to why she just, along the way, she stopped. But they got stuck in my mind. And it was, I think, my very first inspiration. And I was quite young. I was I must have been under 7 years old. And I still have I vividly remember that image.
So was your mother very encouraging then of you to do this work when you started to get serious about it? Was she always very encouraging of you to follow it up as a career?
My entire family has always been very encouraging. I'm quite fortunate to have my family behind me on this. And they were the ones that were pushing me to hone this craft, even when I wanted to stop or to back down. And I'm very lucky in that sense because they've seen that it's something that I could potentially develop into a skill set or just a talent, I guess, if you want to call it that, to push it forward. And they've constantly encouraged that.
And when you were a small child, though, before you were 7 and starting to really understand the intricacies of the work and be fascinated by it, what kind of a child were you? Because as you said, you were growing up in the end of a communist era in Romania. And those of us who can remember that period know it was a very troubling time for Romania. So give us a sense of what that looked like for you as a young child and the only child growing up at that time.
I mean, I had I would say an extremely happy childhood. I did not feel the communist times. Let's say my parents will constantly tell me stories, and I do remember bits and pieces, but I was very young when it ended. And once that ended, I feel like Romania went through a little bit of a social and economic boom. As in, my parents were, when I was 7 years old, they started their own company in security. And they were always entrepreneurs, and they were always kind of instilled that in me, a little bit of independence. And they made sure that, I guess because they grew up in communist times, they wanted me to experience life differently. So it was a lot of camps sending me to trips, trying to experience the world in a way that they didn't have the opportunity. So I'm always grateful for that. And it was always encouraged to try as many things that I could to figure out what I'm interested in or what I'm attracted to. And they always encouraged that without repercussions. I still remember the very first computer that was brought, and they brought the computers and they had no idea how to use it or what it was. And they put it in front of me and they said, you know what? This is, you discover, go nuts with it. Go, we don't know any better. So you try and discover what it does, how we can use it. And I did that. I think that was the very first time where I realized that I like discovering things or trying to figure things out on my own.
So would you have considered yourself an indoor child or an outdoor child? Which did you prefer?
I was a bit of a mix. I loved being outdoors, but I'm also the kind of person right now, but even in my childhood, one that can enjoy oneself's company. I could sit indoors and I will never get bored. I would figure things out to do, whether it was a form of art or playing or puzzles or anything in that matter. But I did have a group of friends growing up from that, we spend time with each other our entire childhood. And it did involve a lot of outdoors. You weren't as cooped up, I would say, as this generation is now. So there was always I think a balanced mix.
And in terms of school, were you a good student? Were you a keen student? How did you feel about it?
I think I was a good student. I always was pretty high with marks. My parents were also very strict when it came to school. So education was always first. It was always put first. The kind of, as long as you make sure you focus on your education, you could have time afterwards to play, meet your friends. But there was always a heavy aspect put on education. And I enjoyed school very much. I wasn't the kind of kid that shied away from it.
And what did you enjoy at school?
Romanian school system is quite different, I found, from other countries in the sense that you didn't have a lot of liberty of choosing your subject, even in high school. So the way it worked, you picked what you would call a major, and they would create a curriculum and all the courses based on that major. I was in math and English. So all my courses were kind of related to mathematics, computer science, chemistry, physics, those kind of courses. I had no say in choosing. And I did like those courses. I thought that it would help me later on. I've always found myself a little bit more analytical than I would say creative, which is funny thinking now. But I'm not sure if I had other choices or opportunities or taking art classes, if my answer would change. I didn't really have a choice in my courses, so I had to find ways of enjoying the ones that were provided to us.
And now what about music and sports? Was there an opportunity to participate and learn?
There was. I found that I was never very athletic. I do enjoy certain sports, but not necessarily group sports that involves a lot of running. And music, to this day, I will say to everybody that I cannot sing to save my life. It's I can recognize when I have no skill or talent in a certain aspect, and that is definitely music.
Now, what about your parents? What kind of talents did they have, apart from your mother and her artwork? Were they musical? What? I'm just trying to get a sense of what things you did with each of your parents, maybe separately or together. What sort of activities?
My father especially enjoyed music. I wouldn't particularly say that they were both musical, or nobody played an instrument in my family. It was definitely a lot of time spent together, and we would go a lot in nature, picnics, going out to the lake, and just spending quality time that way. It wasn't necessarily activities. My mother was the one that would help me a lot with school, with homework, and she would always be on top of that. So it wasn't particularly a set of activities. I've always done, let's say, drawing or art by myself. So I can't remember specific crafts or certain activities other than just, spending time together, hanging out, or being outdoors.
Did you have pets?
I did have pets. I still have pets. I love animals. Growing up, I had a lot of parrots, which had their own personality and characters, and I fondly remember them. Later on in life, I had cats. I still have cats. And it's always been pets I find that were suiting to our lifestyles. My parents growing up, they were, as I mentioned, entrepreneurs, and they had their own company, and they were working constantly, working hours. I spent a lot of time after school in their office. So having a dog that you would walk was never really suited for that lifestyle. And later on, I realized that it doesn't suit me either, though I absolutely love dogs. So it's always been pets that kind of are okay being independent for a little while.
Now, you did move from Constanta, from the Black Sea, inland towards, I think, Bosnia, isn't it? Where you moved to Resit?
Yes, close to Serbia.
What was the reason for moving across the country?
My father back then was in the military. He was a captain in the military for Romania, and he was just transferred. He was given an opportunity to move, and my parents took it at the time. So I don't have a lot of memories of Constanța as my birthplace. I consider my home Reșița. That's where I grew up, and that's where I think we moved when I was 3 or 4 years old. So most of my memories are there. And I never felt like there was Constanța was really a home other than a birthplace. I used to go visit in the summer, the Black Sea, but it was never really considered as a home, I would say.
And where were your grandparents? Were you close to them? Did you, hang out? So often with grandparents, we have a special bond, don't we, with one or the other. Did you bond with any of your grandparents?
For sure. I had a close relationship, I would say, with all my grandparents, but particularly on my mother's side. Both sets of grandparents, they were from the same village in Romania, which was about 5 hours away. They were in the south, about 5 hours away from Reșița. And we used to visit often. But my grandmother used to come and stay with us for quite long periods of times at the time, helping my mother, raising me, and sometimes my cousin was with us as well. So it was definitely a close relationship. She's not with us anymore, but I do remember a lot of my childhood memories do surround her.
What kind of stories did they share with you? Because, of course, they grew up right in the midst of communism.
Yes, for sure. It was quite different because my grandfather in particularly was a high voltage electrician, and he had this unique opportunity that was unheard of in during communist time in Romania, where he worked out of the country a lot. He used to do a lot of work in the Middle East. So he would always like France, even Morocco, and he would always bring back stories. So it was always a unique, I would say, opportunity for people in Romania, because they usually during communist times you weren't freely allowed to leave the country. So this was, I would say, they were always, for us, what felt at a time like exotic stories. And my grandfather was a storyteller. He would love telling stories, and I do remember him, sitting down with me and just constantly telling me stories about these places.
Now you're living over in Canada. You're separated from your roots and your family. How do you compensate for that, with the family bonds?
I mean, I think I've adapted to Canada pretty well. My mother is here. My father is still in Romania. And it's obviously there's things that I certainly miss about the lifestyle and the culture in Romania, but I wouldn't say that I constantly feel a disconnect. It's I still very much speak Romanian every day. The food culture is very Romanian in my life. And we do try to keep certain celebrations that I guess keep the culture alive and, make you feel closer to your home roots.
What age were you when you migrated to Canada?
I moved here at 21. It's funny because it's January 9th, 2007 that I moved here.
So it must be the anniversary of moving here then.
Yes, almost an anniversary.
During your time, though, as a young woman in Romania, did you get exposed to the art? Did your parents take you to museums and galleries and give you the exposure to whet your appetite, so to speak?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, my family was always supportive. And the moment that they realized that I do have an interest in art, they did try to encourage that. It was a lot of trips to museum, and every opportunity that there was school-wise to send me to certain trips, they took it. So I'm very grateful for that. I was exposed to a lot of museums, whether it was like Romania or internationally. And that's where I also realized that the more I was exposed to art, the more I loved it and the more I felt inspired. Now, being in Romania and there still being not to say a taboo, but people still have a misconception as, arts not being a serious profession. It was always in the back of my head, how can I use my love for art to try to make a career, which is why architecture came in play.
Did you feel that then that you might not be able to make a living, that you would have to do something else? Like you say, the architecture that you studied, that became an option. And then later you studied interior design in Canada, in Toronto. Was this all as a backup plan in case you couldn't be the artist that you dreamt of being?
Honestly, no. I never actually thought that I would be an artist. As I mentioned, it was always kind of in the back of my head that, you can't really, art will be a hobby and I love doing that. But I didn't really see it as a career early on. So I never actually had aspirations or dreams of being an artist or to be an artist that would make a living out of it. So I was architecture and interior design were always kind of the primary focus when I was thinking of a career. So yes, I know it's an odd choice because I feel like there has been a shift in my life in the last few years, especially. But I've never been one of those kids that aspired to be an artist or dreamed about it.
So when did that shift?
So I started drawing, I would say, a lot more seriously, even during high school years. And it was always primarily portraits. I loved portraits. I loved human form. I loved studying light, shadows. And I was always drawn to portraits in particular, but there was a little bit of a disconnect in the sense that I realized that I never liked hanging my work. And for the longest time, I couldn't realize why. I always thought it was, I was shy about it. And my mother always loved hanging my work. So it was always a frustrating part for me. And it was a search in trying to find, I would say, my voice or kind of what I was drawn to as much. When I was in university, drawing portraits kind of took a step back. I was focused on the academics. And right after university, I I took a job, but then quite early after I started my own company in interior design here. So it just took all of my time. And drawing definitely was second choice. It took a back step, but doing that, I just realized how much I missed it along the way. So it felt like I needed to return to it because something was missing. I was just lacking that kind of disconnect that I've grown to love about drawing. And it just sort of organically happened as a transition going back.
Tell us about your reasons for coming to Toronto and what that was all about, and how it came about, really, and what you found to do. Did you come to study?
No, so my mother had first moved here in 2003. So she was here first. And initially, I thought I would not move to Canada. I was starting, I was finishing my high school and I was starting university architecture there. And it just sort of felt like the plan was in motion. Architecture in Romania is 6 years. So I felt like I've already committed to this. And, I wanted to see it through. But something happened during university where I realized that I was very frustrated with the system there. It's just I didn't feel like I was getting out of it what I wanted. And I started thinking more so as an adult of my opportunities later on in life. And I just thought that if there was a choice to be made to move and to make that switch was then. And it's what I did. When I moved to Canada, coming here in January, it was straight applying to university. So I did not have time to kind of realize what I have done and the entire shift because it was such a busy time and it was a go-go motion trying to get everything done. And I felt like I moved from one university to another. So there wasn't a period of transition where I would feel like I'm a completely different country, or it felt pretty natural.
Were you able to speak English fluently then from school?
Yes. So in Romania, it's mandatory to take 2 foreign languages. You start your first foreign language in 2nd grade and your second in 5th grade. So I started speaking English when I was 8 as a second language. So that helped a lot for sure.
And what was your other language?
Initially, it was French. And later on, it was a little bit of German.
Out of necessity, you speak English now, but which do you prefer of those languages?
I definitely prefer English. I have to say that I took 8 years of French, and while I understand French, my speaking is probably not the best. I never felt really a connection with the language. And so it's safe to say that English is definitely my preferred one.
And of course, having had such good basic English before you arrived in Canada would help you settle too. It makes such a difference if you have a knowledge of the language in a strange country.
Absolutely. I think it made a whole lot of difference because I didn't feel that intimidated. I had friends that moved from Romania earlier on than me, friends from school, and they had to adjust in that way. So I saw firsthand how difficult that was. I have to say, for me, that it was never a difficult transition. As I mentioned, I think it was quite natural. And I'm not sure that me going straight into school and not having time to process or anything like that helped a lot. But definitely the language was a huge help.
You mentioned that your mother came first in
Mhm.
2003 and your father did not. Did that mean your parents had separated? What was the reason for your mother coming here?
Yes, my parents would have been divorced since I was a child. Very good relations. I have my extended family, so to speak. My stepfather, my stepmother. They're very dear to me. They're as close to parents as they could be. So I've always had a very good relationship. So that it's always been that way. Even now, I don't make that distinction. Let's say. So my mother and her husband, they moved here obviously for better opportunities. Even after communist times in Romania, they felt like there wasn't the greatest opportunities out there. So how everybody, when they decide to move, is just to create a better life for themselves, and that's kind of what they did.
Now, you mentioned when you graduated from university, you got a job, but then you started your own business very quickly. How did you muster that idea and, make it happen? Because that's a bold move straight out of university.
So it's funny because I used to work with for a company, interior design company, and that's where I met my now business partner, a friend. And she left first the company, and we still, very much kept in touch. We developed a really good friendship, and we remember sitting down at a dinner once, and she was discussing her prospects and kind of what are her next plans for, in terms of job opportunities and kind of directions of her career. And we just sort of started talking and realized that we kind of both wanted the same thing. And we learned that we worked really, really well together. We complemented each other's skills and weaknesses, so to speak. So it just felt natural. We decided, okay, let's try and create a company and work it the way that, feel like it should be done, and create projects that, we have complete control over. And it just felt natural. We started that. It was absolutely scary. I agree. It was I'm not sure looking back if taking such a bold step. There was a huge learning curve. It still is. I feel like with the having your own company, there's constant learning curves.
So what did you each do in the business when you started the business?
So I have always been a lot more on the technical side. So for me, I took the roles of doing a lot of the technical drawing, construction drawings that were part of projects. And Jennifer, my business partner, she was always better at liaisoning with the client, so she was in charge of that and more of the creative portion of it. Now we do have a project where we constantly work with together, so we never took a project on our own. We value each other's input and we find that it works well, but we do take very specific roles when it comes to working on that specific project.
And how much of your time is in the business now? Is it full time? And I'm wondering how much time you have for your artwork within the business.
So when I first started, it was full business, and my artwork was after work hours. It was always at night, and there was never days specifically dedicated to artwork unless it was weekends or holidays, things like that. In the last few years, especially in the last year, there's been a bit of a shift where I find that working more on commissions, on drawings, I needed to create a better schedule because things were not working. I was constantly burnt out. And we just divided. Now I have, for example, Mondays are my art days. And I guess the beauty of having your own business and being your own boss is that flexibility. And my business partner understands that very well, and she's very supportive also of my artwork. So depending on the workload for each of the businesses, let's say, the schedule becomes a little bit more flexible.
And what kind of things do you do in the business then between you?
So I'm still in charge of most of the technical drawings, but we tackle the projects together. So depending on if a project is a lot more construction based or if it's a lot more sourcing materials, furniture, things like that, it will shift. Site visits and everything like project management, we still do things together because we realize that we both need to be in the know of everything that happens on a project, and we felt like that's a good balance. But definitely the sourcing of materials, things like that fall under Jennifer's scope of work. The technical drawings, the AutoCAD, fall under mine.
So you mentioned the commissions that you get for your artwork, Sinziana. I'm wondering, to what extent your work is commission-based.
I would say most of my work now has been commission-based, especially the last year. The last year has been a shift where I would say 90% of the work I did was commission-based and only 10% of my own personal work. So it's been a bit of a juggle in terms of doing that and a bit of a shift from a scheduling point of view. I'm trying this year to keep it a little bit more balanced, or at least to try to get a few of the personal projects and experimentations out of the way. But the majority of my work is commission-based.
And where do these commissions typically come from? Give us a sense of the type of clients you have for these works, because it's almost exclusively watches, is it?
Yes, in the last few years, it has been mostly watches with a few bits and pieces of other subjects in between, but primarily watches. I would say social media has definitely played a huge part in my commission work. A lot of my commission work is coming from Instagram, but I have also done, let's say, local events here where they were specifically watch events, where I got to network with people, and some of the commissions come that way. But I would say the majority of it has been social media.
And is it exclusively pencil work?
Yes. I've always been drawn to pencil. I find that it's such a humble medium, and I kind of get a thrill of, taking that medium to its limits. I like experimenting with it, and a lot of times you look at a pencil and you think it's pretty straightforward. And what I have learned throughout my career is that, it's actually so incredibly versatile. I do love the precision of it and, the control you have over the shading in particular to create the light shadow aspect and the tonal values that I find incredible in pencil. So I never really shied away from it. It's always been my main focus, and I don't think that will change. However, I have been experimenting with a little bit of other mediums to try to complement it. And I feel like that's going to be a lot more in focus in 2025 to try to create artwork that has a little bit more depth or surprising elements in it, but still not losing sight that, the pencil is the main star there.
Can you give us an idea of what other mediums you would use?
So I've been experimenting a little bit with the gold leaf as well as modeling paste. So I have always been drawn to texture, and I love texture in artwork. Now, graphite tends to be pretty flat. So I love showing texture to graphite and creating that kind of optical illusion. But I do like the idea of trying to incorporate other mediums that add their own texture on their own. So I've been experimenting with that and trying to see how, I can complement graphite with them and how to make it work. But I'm still in stages of experimentation. That's why nothing has been shown yet. So I'm looking forward to see how this year it develops and where it takes me.
Well, this is rather how long is a piece of string question, but I'm wondering if there's an idea roughly with a watch, how long you would take to finish a piece like that. What would that involve?
I'm actually not the typical artist where I find myself quite technical, and I tend to be quite organized in that sense. I do keep track of hours on every piece I work. And that's mostly, it started happening because I needed to be better at scheduling my work. But it's also to have a better understanding of, how long a piece takes. I would say a large drawing for me, that's typically a 22 by 30 inches. That's an average of 150 hours plus.
100 hours plus?
Yes. Where I've had pieces with over 200 hours.
The attention to detail is one thing, but the patience are just, I'm trying to get my head around, how still you have to be, how patient, how painstaking with every stroke and movement. And there's really no room for error. So how do you feel about when, it just doesn't turn out, there's a mistake, and can you rectify it quickly enough, disguise it in a way? I mean, because the focus is so intense, it's not like, if you paint a big picture, in oils or acrylic or something, if it's a big canvas, you can disguise something. If you made a mistake, you can get away with it to a certain extent. Not so much, I don't think, with the kind of detail you work in pencil.
I think you would be surprised. I think that's a perception that everybody has, which I had for a long time. I was terrified when I was working, especially in portraits. For the longest time, I was terrified of making mistakes. And it's funny because I've been fortunate enough to have, call them mentors throughout my life, academic mentors that have opened my eyes in so many ways. And one of my professors told me, Sinziana, you have to, with everything you do, but especially with the craft, go back to basic, learn what the medium can do and cannot do. And once you master that, only then go and start pushing the limits. And it really, really stuck with me. And it kind of made me less afraid to try to make a mistake. So working with graphite over and over and over again, it kind of let me understand, what happens when you make a mistake and how to easily correct it. I always tell people that, especially at the beginning of their career, that ask me, and I said, it's only pencil. It can be erased. I work in layers constantly. So that's why I think also it takes a certain amount of time, because you build up the image. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at hyperrealism, they think that it almost gets drawn kind of like a printer, where it's like line by line. And it's not like that. It's built up in layers. So as you build up the layers, you realize where a mistake can be, and it can be quite easily rectified. There have been only a few drawings that I still have that I have started that were never finished, or they were scrapped. But that was not because of a mistake. It was mostly realizing that, let's say, the the paper and the graphite didn't mix well. So to make an ending to this, I would say it's as much as it feels like you can easily make mistakes when it's such a precise work. I feel like once you understand the medium and you understand what you can do with it, you actually have quite a lot of flexibility to work with it, and you're not as afraid to make those mistakes. They can be easily corrected.
Do you like that absolute silence? Is that what focuses you? What's the ideal work environment for you?
It's funny because I actually hate silence when I work. I need background noise. And I've experimented with a lot of things. I've tried listening to music. I've tried listening to podcasts. And I realized that I need sound, but it has to be familiar sounds that do not distract me enough. If it's anything new where my mind needs to pay attention to it, like a podcast, I seem to drift away and I don't focus as much on the drawing. So I realized for me that I need to play, let's say, old series of movies that I enjoyed, that I've seen them before, so I don't have to pay attention to them, but I do enjoy the dialogue or the conversation. So it's usually reruns of a series or movies that I've enjoyed throughout the years, and they're constantly on repeat. I know it may seem odd.
And they're playing in the background. So obviously you don't watch them. They're just playing in the background.
Yes, they are. No, I don't watch them.
Star Trek is one of the favorites then.
Yes, it is.
What other kind of films do you like?
Anything. I love science fiction because I love the imagination behind it. So the Star Trek being one of them, but also any comedies of old sitcoms, especially like 90s sitcoms. Let's say Two and a Half Men, Friends, Seinfeld. Things like that seem to go on repeat.
What do you listen to for fun then? Maybe when you're driving or working out or something. What's your preferred genre?
I do listen to music. I grew up listening to classic rock, so a lot of the music I gravitate towards is that. But I have a huge interest in all sorts of different music. As I mentioned before, I don't consider myself musical, so for me it's instinctual. I would listen to anything that kind of just goes with my mood at the time. I'll always go back to the classics, but I've listened to anything from classical music I like to even pop, and mention classic rock, Latin music. It's just a huge variety.
Where do you see the future with your artwork? Do you want to reach a point where you're focusing exclusively, you give up the business and you're exclusively working on your art, or not?
Sure. I mean, I consider both branches to be my babies. I love doing both. So there's no plan for exclusivity at this time. I've learned in the last few years, especially once pandemic hit, is that you have to be open to opportunities and you have to kind of take opportunities as they come. And I've really, in the last few years, let myself go with the flow and kind of see where it goes and, see how it can develop. Because as I mentioned, growing up, I never really thought that I would be sitting down doing commissions for artwork. It was more so a personal hobby, and it was quite intimate for a very long time. So I quite enjoyed, in the last few years especially, doing these collaborations with other people and, discovering that I actually really love doing commissions. So it's been, I would say, a journey of discovery. So I'm taking it as it is right now, and we'll see where it takes me. I'm open to different possibilities.
And the journey.
Yes.
Who knows where life will take us? Now, what about public galleries and museums? Where could we find your work publicly?
So right now in galleries, I do not have work in galleries. I have tried in the past. I mean, I had work in galleries here in Toronto, but it didn't quite work out. And I have been not hesitant, but I've been very selective in that particular aspect. I feel like, especially with galleries, there has to be a bit of a symbiotic relationship. And it needs to be a great match for both myself and the gallery. And I haven't quite found that in the sense. I'm very happy with how things are right now. There's a few hesitations that I have in terms of going, let's say, exclusively towards a gallery sort of model. I feel like what I'm doing right now works for me. I would be open to gallery, but under certain, I don't want to say conditions, but it definitely has to be the right relationship first.
And most of your work, you do post on Instagram, right? And on your website.
There's always been work that has never been posted. I find that with commissions, especially, sometimes they tend to be on the very personal side. And I have been, very fortunate enough to have clients that understand that, building that portfolio is important for an artist. So they have allowed me to share some of the commissions. But I've had commissions in the past as well where they've never been shared because they were personal and there were added details, I would say, in those drawings that were too personal to share publicly. So they have stayed hidden. And it's just that been I would say an intimate commission journey between, artist and the person that commissioned it. But most of the work has been, I try to post on Instagram, not very good at keeping a regular schedule, but I do try.
So when you finish a piece, do you scan it so you have a personal reference for your own collection?
If it's a commission that has been one and done, as in it will never be turned into a print, I only take photos for my own reference and they're not professionally done. They're my own photos. But if it is a drawing, that if it's a personal drawing or if there's been a commission that will be turned into a print, then I have it professionally scanned. And that way I can have a really good rendition of the final image that can be printed at the highest quality.
And your partner, Alex, is also an artist and painter. Tell me more.
Yes, he is. He's a very talented multimedia artist. So it's great to kind of have first that support because he understands what, the art life is and kind of the journey you have as an artist. But it's been interesting because our styles they're quite different. They're quite an opposite spectrum. And it's actually great to have that exposure to different mediums and to understand what, can be done in terms of, let's say, paint, or he's open-minded to modeling paste and gold leaf and things like that. And it's great to bounce off ideas, and we constantly have, I wouldn't call them critique sessions, but we value each other's opinion, and we say things as they are, and I think that makes us stronger as artists.
So 2025, what does that mean for you, Sinziana? What are you looking forward to this year?
I'm definitely looking forward to experiment more with my work. I've been doing that behind the scenes a bit, but I really want to take it a little further this year. And I really want to go larger scale. And as much as that terrifies me, because I know the amount of hours that needs to be put in it, it's just I find myself drawn to much larger scales. There's quite a few collaborations that I'm very excited for this year that are in the works, and hopefully they will be revealed this year. And it's been great connecting with people that share both interests, both art and watches. So getting to know that community a lot more, and having opportunities to be part of such collaboration has been amazing. So that's definitely something that I'm looking forward this year, and trying to hone those collaborations and try to come up with things that, there's always a step up. Like I'm always trying to each work to be my best work. So it's just focusing a lot more on the craftsmanship part, and developing my technique more, and just doing a lot more experimentation. I think that would be the key word for 2025, is to get a little bit out of my comfort zone and experiment more.
Well, the very best of luck with all of it, Sinziana. It really is absolutely beautiful work, and long may it continue. And
thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And I encourage you to follow the links in our show notes to Sinziana's website and also to her social media, so you can see for yourself the intricacies and precision of her work. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Art Podcast. Don't forget that's art with 2 A's. And we're also on YouTube now at The Art Podcast. And there you will find videos of the entire show, plus lots of sound bites and promotions for each episode. So hop on over to YouTube, where, as I say, you can listen to the entire episode, or you can watch the videos of our guests from each episode here on Season 3 of the Art Podcast. You can also find us on a new email address too. That's The Art Podcast, art of course with 2 A's, theartpodcast@gmail.com. And if you have any suggestions for guests who you think we should have on the show, please do drop us a line. Of course, you can also send us a DM on Instagram at The Art Podcast. And as you may have heard, this season is bi-weekly, so I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode. Until then, my thanks again to this week's guest, Sinziana Iordache, and to you for listening. Goodbye for now.